I hid my pregnancy for 3 months from my Amish husband. My mother knew why. My name is Christina, and I was 23 years old the autumn I learned that a woman could carry 2 secrets inside her body at the same time. One her husband must never see, and one her mother had been carrying for her since the day she was born. I want to tell you about the 3 months I hid a pregnancy from Eli, the man I had married in the small white meeting house on Miller's Ridge, and about the evening my mother set a cup of peppermint tea in front of me and said, without looking up, "I know. I have known since the 2nd week." She had counted before I had. She had counted the way a woman counts who has done this kind of counting before. I should start with the morning the trust between us first cracked, because that morning is the reason everything else became possible. It was a Tuesday in early September. I was kneeling in our garden, behind the Dardy house, where Eli and I had been living since our wedding the previous spring. I had been pulling beets, and the smell of the wet earth rose up and turned my stomach so suddenly that I sat down between the rows and pressed my forehead against my wrist. My mother-in-law, Sarah, had walked up the path without my hearing her. She did not ask if I was unwell. She looked once at my face, once at the basket, and said, "When were you going to tell my son?" Then she turned back toward the main house, without waiting for an answer. I had not yet told myself. I had not yet said the word, even silently. But Sarah had said it for me, in a voice that sounded less like joy and more like an accusation already filed. That was the first rung of the ladder, though I did not know yet that I was climbing one. I want you to understand Eli, the way I understood him then, before the shape of him changed in my eyes. He was 26, soft-spoken, the kind of man whose hands were always gentle with the harness leather and the lambs. In our district, the people who raised me called it the Stillwater District, 3 church houses north of the main settlement. Eli was considered a good match for me. His father, Amos Hostetler, sat on the minister's bench. But my father, Daniel, did not. That difference mattered more than people said aloud. When Amos approved of my courtship with his son, my own father straightened a little at the supper table, as though a weight he had not named had lifted from his chest. My mother did not straighten. My mother, Hannah, watched the wedding plans take shape with the careful, watchful face of a woman watching a kettle that might or might not boil over. I remember she came into my room the night before the wedding and sat on the edge of my bed and asked me, very quietly, "Christina, do you know him well enough to be alone with him for the rest of your life?" I laughed. I told her of course I did. She did not laugh back. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and said, "If anything ever frightens you, you come home to me. You come home before you decide anything else." I thought she meant the ordinary fears of a new bride. I thought she was being sentimental. I kissed her cheek and told her I would be fine. I was wrong about what she meant. I was wrong for 2 years. In our first year of marriage, Eli was patient with me in the daytime and a stranger to me at night. I do not mean cruel. I mean unreachable. He would come in from the barn and eat his supper and read aloud from the Osbund. And when I tried to speak about anything beyond the chores, he would set his spoon down with a small, precise movement and say, "Christina, that is not a thing a wife troubles her husband with." Always the same words, always the same calm voice. After a while, I stopped troubling him. After a while, I noticed that I had stopped speaking about almost everything, and that he had not noticed I had stopped. I tell you these small things because they explain the big thing. When I missed my monthly that August, I did not run to Eli with the news. I sat on the wooden chair beside our bed and tried to imagine his face hearing it, and I could not. I could imagine Amos's face. I could imagine Sarah's face. I could imagine the bishop's face. I could not imagine Eli's, and that frightened me more than anything. So I said nothing. For 1 week. For 2. It was the 2nd week when my mother knew. I had walked the half-mile down the lane to her kitchen on a Saturday afternoon because she had asked me to help her put up tomatoes. We worked side by side in the heat of the stove, and I felt her glance at me twice. Once when I refused the slice of bread she offered, once when I pressed my hand briefly against the small of my back. She did not speak about it that day. She poured the tea. She set the cup in front of me. And she said the sentence I told you about already. I know, I have known since the second week. I started to cry. I had not cried yet about any of it. I had been holding it the way a person holds a glass too full of water, walking carefully so as not to spill. When she said those words, the glass tipped. She let me cry without touching me. When I was finished, she said, "Do not tell Eli yet. I want you to hold that sentence in your mind, because everything I am about to tell you turns on it. Do not tell Eli yet." My own mother, the woman who had raised me to be truthful in all things, who had switched my legs once when I was 9 for lying about a broken jar. She told me to keep a child's secret from the child's father, and she did not explain why. I asked her why. Of course I asked. She only shook her head and said, "Give me until the leaves turn. Give me that much, Christina. Then I will tell you, and then you will decide." I gave her that much. I do not entirely know why I gave it to her. Perhaps because she had never asked me for anything before. Perhaps because some part of me had already understood that Eli was not a safe person to hand a secret to, and she was offering me a place to set it down. So I began to hide. I learned in those weeks how easy it is to disappear inside your own marriage. I let out the seams of my dresses by 1/4 inches, the way a woman does when she has eaten well through the winter. I refused coffee in the morning and blamed the taste. I rose earlier than Eli so he would not see me at the basin. When the nausea came, I stepped out to the chicken coop and pressed my forehead against the cool board of the door until it passed. Eli did not notice. That is the part that still surprises me. Even now, after everything, he did not notice. A man can live in the same 4 rooms as his wife and not notice that her body has become a country he no longer visits. But Sarah noticed. And Sarah said nothing to Eli either, which was the second rung of the ladder, and the one that confused me most at the time. She began to appear at my kitchen door at odd hours. She would bring me a jar of broth, a packet of dried raspberry leaf, a small folded square of muslin, she said was for later. She never used the word pregnancy. She never used the word baby. She would set these things on my table and look at me with a flat, measuring expression and say, "Your color is poor today, Christina. Sit." And I would sit, because I did not know what else to do. I began to think that perhaps Sarah, in her cold way, was protecting me. I began to think that perhaps she and my mother had spoken, and that the women of the family were building a quiet bridge underneath me that the men could not see. I was wrong about Sarah. I was right about the bridge, but I had the architects backwards. The first time I tried to ask my mother what she knew, it was the middle of October. The leaves had turned, the way she had asked them to. I went to her kitchen on a Wednesday morning, when I knew my father would be at the lumber mill. I sat at her table and said, "Ma'am, you promised." She did not look at me. She was rolling out pie dough, and her hands were white with flour, and the line of her mouth was the line I had seen on the night before my wedding. She said, "Christina, has Eli ever raised his hand to you?" I told her no. I told her the truth. Eli had never struck me. She said, "Has he ever told you that you would not be permitted to do something? Has he ever told you what you could not say or could not ask?" I thought about it. I told her about the spoon, set down so precisely. I told her about the Osbond read aloud, always at the same hour, always from the same pages. I told her about how I had stopped speaking of anything beyond the chores. She listened without lifting her eyes from the dough. When I finished, she said, very quietly, "That is how it begins. That is exactly how it begins." I asked her how what began. She set the rolling pin down. She wiped her hands on her apron. She said, "Eli's first wife did not die the way the family told it. I want you to understand that I had known Eli was a widower. Everyone in the district knew. He had been married, briefly, at 20, to a girl named Rebecca Yoder from across the county, and she had died in childbirth in her 7th month, and the child with her. It was a sad story, but a common one. No one had ever spoken of it with anything but pity. The Hostetlers had grieved openly. Amos had wept at the funeral. Sarah had worn black for a full year. I had married into that grief, the way a woman marries into a family's furniture, accepting it, arranging around it, not asking too many questions. My mother said, "Rebecca did not die in childbirth, Christina. Rebecca died of a fall." I asked her what she meant. She said, "She fell down the cellar stairs in her 7th month. Sarah found her. Amos brought the bishop before he brought the doctor. The story of the childbirth was decided that same evening, by the men, at the kitchen table. My sister Mira was the midwife who was called the next morning to attend to the body. She told me what she saw. She told me, and she made me promise, and I have kept that promise for 6 years. I sat very still. I sat the way a person sits when she realizes the floor beneath her chair is not the floor she thought it was. I asked her if Eli had pushed Rebecca. My mother said, "I do not know." Mira did not know. No one knows except Eli and the cellar stairs. But I will tell you what Mira told me. Rebecca had bruises on her upper arm in the shape of a hand. Those bruises were 3 or 4 days old. She had not fallen 3 or 4 days earlier. Whatever made those marks happened before the stairs. I asked her why she had let me marry him. That was the question. That was the rung of the ladder that took my weight and almost broke beneath me. I asked it without raising my voice, but I felt my whole life narrow down to the shape of that one sentence, and my mother heard it that way too. She closed her eyes. She kept them closed for a long time. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice was steady. She said, "Because your father took the loan from Amos. Because if you had not married Eli, we would have lost the farm. Because I told myself the story they had decided to tell, the way a woman tells herself a story when she cannot bear the other one. Because I was a coward, Christina, and I am asking your forgiveness now, in this kitchen, before I tell you what to do next." I did not forgive her that day. I am not sure I have ever fully forgiven her, but I sat at her table, and I let her pour me a second cup of tea, and I listened to what she said next, because the woman in front of me had finally, after 23 years, become real. She said, "Sarah knows you are with child. Sarah has been watching you because Sarah is afraid. She is afraid that if Eli learns of the pregnancy before the child is far enough along to be safe, the same thing will happen to you that happened to Rebecca. She believes her son, she does not believe what her son did, so she watches, and she brings broth, and she says nothing, because if she says anything aloud, she will have to choose, and she cannot choose. That is why Sarah has been at your door. That is why she has not told Eli." I understood then that the bridge under me had been built by frightened women, and that frightened women build crooked bridges. Sarah was not protecting me. Sarah was protecting the possibility that her son was not what she feared he was. My mother was protecting me, but she had also protected the loan, and the farm, and her own marriage, for 2 years longer than she should have. And I had been protecting a man who, by the count of bruises on a dead woman's arm, might have already practiced on someone else what calm men sometimes practice on quiet wives. I asked my mother what she wanted me to do. She said, "I want you to go to my sister Mira in Ohio. Tonight I have written to her. She is expecting you. You will stay with her until the child is born, and after, you will decide whether you come back, and what you tell, and to whom. I will not decide it for you. I have decided too many things already." She reached under her apron and took out an envelope of money and a folded paper with the train times written in her own hand. She had been ready. She had been ready perhaps since the 2nd week, when she first counted. I went home that afternoon. I packed a small bag inside a flour sack so it would look like laundry. I left a note for Eli on the kitchen table that said only, "Gone to Mams, will return." I did not return, not for a long time. The hardest part was the lane. The hardest part was walking down our lane in the late afternoon with the flour sack against my hip and feeling the child inside me. 3 months exactly, by my mother's count, and knowing that I was choosing, in that walk, between two kinds of silence. The silence of staying, which would protect the family's name and might cost me my life. The silence of leaving, which would protect my life and would cost me everything else I had been told mattered. I chose the second silence. I am not sorry I chose it. I am sorry it had to be a choice. My daughter was born in Mira's kitchen the following April. I named her Hannah after my mother, because by then I had begun to understand what my mother had done and what it had cost her to do it. Eli came once to Ohio, 6 weeks after the birth. He stood on Mira's porch with his hat in his hands and said he had come to bring his wife and child home. Mira did not let him pass the door. I watched him from the upstairs window. He did not look angry. He looked, more than anything, like a man who had been told a story about himself and could not understand why the story had stopped being believed. He left before supper. He did not come again. I was placed under the ban the following summer. My father signed the paper, my mother did not. That was the last fight of their marriage, and she lost it, and she came to Ohio with one trunk and her Bible 6 months after that, and she lived with Mira and me until she died, 11 years later, of a winter cough that turned into something worse. Sarah Hostetler wrote me one letter, only one, 3 years after I left. It said, "I should have told you before you married him. I am sorry. I could not choose between my son and a girl I did not yet know. I chose wrong. Do not write back." I did not write back. Eli remarried. His third wife, a girl from Indiana, lived 4 years and then died of what the family again called childbirth. After that, even Amos stopped defending him. The district quietly asked Eli to leave. I heard, much later, that he went west and worked in a sawmill and never married a 4th time. I do not know if that is true. I have not tried to find out. My daughter Hannah is grown now. She is a midwife, like her great-aunt Mira. She knows the whole story. I told it to her on her 16th birthday, in one sitting, at a kitchen table, not unlike the one where my mother told it to me. I told her because I had learned that a secret kept to protect a child becomes, eventually, a secret that costs the child something she cannot name. My mother had learned that too, in the end. It was the only thing she ever apologized to me for, and she apologized for it every year, on my birthday, until the year she could not speak anymore. People sometimes ask me why I hid the pregnancy for 3 months. They expect a simple answer. They expect shame, or fear of the church, or some private complication of the body. I tell them the truth, which is not simple. I tell them that I hid it because my mother asked me to, and that my mother asked me to because she had counted the bruises on another woman's arm 6 years before and had said nothing, and was trying, in the only way she knew, to keep from saying nothing twice. That is the answer to the title. That is why she knew. That is why I waited. I will tell you the last thing, and then I will let you go. The peppermint tea, the cup she set in front of me that Saturday in September. I keep the cup. It is chipped along the rim now, and the glaze has gone soft where my thumb rests when I drink from it. I drink from it every morning, not because it reminds me of her courage. She was not, in the end, a courageous woman. She was a frightened woman who finally became honest, which is a smaller thing and a harder thing, and I have come to believe, the only thing any of us can really ask of the people who raised us. I drink from it because it reminds me that the woman who almost failed me is also the woman who saved me, and that both of those things can live inside one cup, and one mother, and one quiet kitchen on a Saturday afternoon when the leaves were just beginning to turn.